How's it going, folks? CR here, and I get this type of response from time to time when I'm discussing gun laws and proposals for gun laws with some people, usually on the internet. It's usually a very specific type of person that gives me this type of response or set of responses. Usually, this person's a younger male firearm owner. Usually, they're in their late teens, early 20s. They own maybe one or two guns themselves. And what happens is they normally make some sort of gun control proposals, and I go and explain to them why they're wrong. And then I'll usually get a very emotional response from them back. So I want to cover these sets of responses. I'm making this as generic as possible, and I'm trying to cover these as many of these as I can, because even though it's not quite so often that I get these responses, I still do get them, and I want to be able to post this just as a response here. A big thing is that these people will either accuse me of knowing it all or think I know it all. They'll accuse me of shooting down their ideas or tearing apart their ideas and not having anything else. They'll claim that I'm not willing to compromise on anything, and that if we don't compromise, we'll lose everything. Things of that nature. Usually a very emotional response. Usually, they want to be treated as if they have the knowledge that they think they have, but really don't. So I'm going to say first off, right off the bat, if I'm condescending to you guys, there's a reason for it. Usually you've said something that is incorrect. I've tried to explain to you how it's incorrect, and you didn't want to listen. So, at that point, I do. There's nothing wrong with not having all the information. There's nothing wrong with being uninformed, so long as you can realize when somebody's trying to explain to you how you're wrong, and try to listen and try to admit when you're wrong yourself, and try to, actually improve, learn, and gain more knowledge. The reason, again, as I say, why I'm condescending to you in the first place is because you seem to be doing just that, or you seem to be accepting of some sort of information that is untrue, and you want me to accept that information as being truthful just to feed your egos. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. You being misinformed is not my problem. Or you believing something that's not true is simply not my problem. So, when you accuse me of thinking I know everything, that's not true. When there is somebody who comes and is knowledgeable and is able to explain to me something new on this topic, I'm willing to listen, and I'm willing to look and learn myself. It's just you guys don't realize that there's a lot more that I know, generally speaking, than you guys know. Spent some time in the Army. I've gone through a few different schools in the Army that a lot of soldiers did not get to go through. I've grown up around firearms. Come from a family, where a lot of people do own firearms. I myself am a firearms enthusiast. There are not many people I know that own more firearms than I do. Granted, there are still a few, but that's generally not very many people. I mean, do you own 50 or more firearms? And again, as I say, I don't have an exact number of how many firearms I'm owning. I'm just making a ballpark guesstimate here. But do you? So you see, you don't quite know. Furthermore, I've been in this debate for decades now. Yes, a lot of the things that some of you guys have been saying, it's not something I haven't heard before. I've heard it before, and this is why I'm responding to you on this one, saying this is simply not true. And usually I'll try to say, well, here's why. And instead of actually reading what I have to say and saying, okay, well, I'm convinced or I'm not convinced, and here's why, you guys just simply come out and say, well, you think you know everything. Well, no, and in fact, it seems to be you guys think you know more than you really do know. So, I keep tearing apart your ideas. Well, there's a reason for it. They're generally bad ideas. Red flag laws, very bad ideas. There's no way you can make red flag laws work out in our favor. Giving them more gun control in general is not going to work out in our favor, which is going to lead me into my next point. There are a lot of you who say, well, if we don't compromise with them now, we'll lose everything. Does that make much sense to you? When in history has a country said, oh, well, since you gun owners didn't want to compromise with us before, now we're going to ban everything? When has that ever happened? You look at a lot of the places with the most restrictive gun laws, save places where a violent revolution happened. And a lot of those places, at some point, had gun laws comparable to the U.S. Some of them, back, in the early 1900s had relatively few gun laws, and in fact, were just, as loose as the U.S. gun laws were in that time frame. The gun laws we got, we didn't get those overnight either. You talk about the 1920s, for the UK, I think it was 1920 when the UK banned full auto, or select fire, basically. Whereas in the US, we put some pretty draconian restrictions on it in the 30s. So yeah, 1919, the UK had very relaxed gun laws, and so did the US. In fact, more relaxed than we do today. So the UK did not get those gun laws overnight. Furthermore, let's look at some of these states with the more restrictive gun laws. Are they more or less likely to respect their firearm owners there? Are they more or less likely to say, okay, you know what, guys, you've been so reasonable and compromised with us that we're going to actually respect your rights and we're not going to ask for anything else? Well, that doesn't appear to be true either. Look at New Jersey, look at New York, look at California. They're still proposing more gun laws. Even in the UK, occasionally they'll talk about adding more restrictions to their already restrictive gun laws. And that's the reason for that being is obviously they're still trying to push and remove freedom. And actually, in the UK, most people think guns are illegal there. They might as well be in a lot of circumstances. I mean, it is still possible to get maybe a bolt-action rifle or a break-open shotgun, you know, if you jump through enough hoops. But it's really difficult to do. And a lot of people don't do it, and a lot of people there seem to think guns are banned there. And they are pretty close to a ban. Far closer than we are. You look at, you know, states like California. They're always proposing another restriction on firearms and ammunition. They haven't stopped that yet. New York, same deal. New Jersey. It's a never-ending process. Actually, a couple of years ago, there was a woman, she was living, I think, in Maryland, or it was, well, she had gotten through all the legal process, legally possessed at least one gun, and she had it, you know, for personal protection. She jumped through all the hoops. Her roommates didn't know she had a firearm. One day, her roommates found a maggot cap among her possessions while she was out of town, or, well, not in the apartment. So they decided to go dig through her stuff, and they found the firearms. You know, so when she got back, they asked her about it, and then she said yes, she lawfully possessed them. And they called the police on her. And the police, you know, came out, verified, yes, she does legally possess them, you know. But right there, those roommates in that state with a bunch of gun laws as is, had even less respect for her own personal property, personal privacy, than they would in a place, say, Texas for the most part. Now, I know there are certain places in Texas where you have people of a similar mindset. So again, the idea that you're going to win by compromising with these people, it's not really a compromise, you're just giving them more, you're trying to placate them more. It's going to have the opposite effect of what you intended. All right. So what do I think is going on in your lives as to why you may very well support this blindly? Well, I already covered that you guys don't have the experience that some people like me have, and that's okay. The longer you live, the more you look into it, and the more you actually go and try to learn, the more knowledge and experience you will gain, and you will start to see, hey, I am right more often than not in this issue when it comes to firearms, firearm laws, and stuff like that. Another possible reason, you have friends and family who are gun controllers, and you haven't, or at least they think they need another gun law, you know. And I've dealt with some people like this too. You got to figure out how to tactfully tell them, hey, you're incorrect. No, I'm not going to support this next gun law. And I understand. There are some of them that get so emotional about this, they'll call you an extremist. Or they'll say stuff like, well, I can't believe you won't even support stuff like smart gun technology, red flag laws, and, you know, universal background checks. Yeah, dudes, I've had ex-girlfriends complain to me about that. I've had one or two relatives get on my case about that. You got to deal with it. That's just life. You might live in a state that already has these restrictive gun laws, and you have to follow them yourself. And you don't think it's fair that somebody like me who lives in Texas, or somebody who lives in Arizona or another state, gets a lot of freedom that you don't. Well, I'm sorry, but supporting these laws at a national level, or supporting more of these laws at a state level, is not going to help your case. It's going to do the opposite of what you intended. Now, I'm sorry that you guys grew up in states that don't have as much respect for your rights as, say, Wyoming or Montana. It is what it is. I mean, and if you want those, maybe a good idea for you guys is to fight and change them. Or if you really have to have the freedom, come out to one of those states, move out to one of those states that does have that freedom, and defend that freedom jealously when you get to that state. Shoot. Not thinking it through is another thing. I mean, if you've listened so far, you've probably already got your answer on this one. Yeah, I mean, things like mandatory training, safe storage laws, stuff like that, red flag laws, may seem like a good idea if you haven't thought them through, and they may seem like they're going to work if you haven't thought them through, but when you start to think about it, and you start to think of what all can go wrong with those laws, and what all has gone wrong with those laws, even comparing them to the Constitution, and seeing what the Constitution actually has to say on this, well, you start to see these things are really bad ideas. You guys not thinking this through is not my problem. Yeah. All right. So, with that being said, guys, when I'm saying this right here, when you're getting talked to like this is a time when you guys really need to go back and listen to what I said prior, or read what I wrote prior. Think about what I've said, and then come back, on this. This whole idea, this whole thing of saying, well, you think you just know more than everybody else, stuff like that. That type of emotional reaction right there doesn't make you look any better. In fact, that actually makes you look worse, and it's degrading yourself when you give me that type of response. Thank you all for watching. Y'all take it easy out there, and have a great day.